Radio 2 presenter Reverend Ruth Scott passes away of cancer aged 60. Pause for thought. Broadcaster Reverend Ruth Scott has died aged 60 after a 2-year secret battle with cancer, it was revealed today. The mother of two passed away peacefully in Southampton General Hospital on Wednesday evening, with her husband Chris and daughter Freya, 30, present. She also has a son, Jan, 23. There has been an outpouring of grief over her death, having only revealed she was terminally ill a week ago and said, "I've had a fantastic life, I just wish it had been longer." Her final broadcast 8 days ago left listeners in floods of tears when she revealed from her hospital bed that she was about to die. Today, announcing Reverend Scott's death, her family said in a statement, "Ruth died peacefully in Southampton General Hospital on Wednesday evening with her husband and daughter present." Tributes have poured in from stars including Radio 2 DJ Sarah Cox, who said, "This is so sad. Rest in peace, Ruth. She had a light in her eyes and such strength, yet was so gentle. Sending my love to her husband, kids and the whole family." While Lewis Carney, head of Radio 2 said, Reverend Ruth Scott was much loved amongst the Radio 2 family. Working with both Sir Terry Wogan and Chris Evans, her pause for thought reflections were enjoyed by millions of listeners to the Radio 2 breakfast show over the years. "Our thoughts are with Ruth's family at this sad time." Reverend Scott calmed the nerves of listeners in her frequent pause for thought broadcasts on the Radio 2 breakfast show. As her life slipped away, she was interviewed on Virgin Radio at Southampton General Hospital by close friend Chris Evans. She was joined by her husband of 37 years, Chris, and talked about leaving behind her 2 children. She bravely told the DJ, "I've got 2 or 3 weeks to live at most, so we're in the middle of saying goodbyes with the family and thinking about how it is to be separating from one another." She said, "Death feels very weird at one level, but it feels very natural at another level. I've got to accept the fact that I'm dying. I've had the most fantastic life. I just wish that it had been longer." Reverend Ruth also mentioned a tender moment in which her son sat at her bedside and asked her if she could give him 60 years of wisdom in one day. "My son, Jan keeps saying to me I love you, but it's because I won't be able to tell you for very much longer." Reverend Ruth said she thought she'd end up in a wicker coffin, or scattered in the Bay of Broddock, and described planning a celebratory memorial service of colour. The broadcaster was one of the first female priests in the Church of England. Reverend Kate Botley paid tribute on Pause for Thought on Zoe Ball's breakfast show, saying, "Christians, and vicars in particular, can often be accused of not living in the real world. That couldn't be said of Ruth Scott. She not only lived in the real world, she wanted to change it." Her congregations were lucky. Ruth wasn't your typical vicar. Few can claim to have also trained as a magician and fire eater. She added, "Ruth's scripts were always honest. She was never one to dodge a harsh reality, and in the last few years Ruth spoke movingly about her illness. During a spell when she felt well enough, Ruth and her husband Chris had few days break in Cornwall. They were out for a meal at a restaurant when the owner asked if they were celebrating anything in particular. Being alive, Ruth said. The owner ripped up the bill. The meal was his gift. It was a generous present to a person who was generous with her time and her compassion. We have lost a radio friend. Listeners took to Twitter after hearing her final interview, praising Chris for his gentle interviewing style, calling it some of the best radio I've ever heard. Another described it as a soul-enhancing start to the day. At the interview's start, she told the Virgin Post, "I might not be coherent." Reverend Ruth was diagnosed 2 years ago with a lymphoma and has been having treatment ever since. The mother of two said she had been hoping to have a donor stem cell treatment. However, she was told at the start of February that it was not possible, and that she had just weeks to live. Chris mentioned her work as a missionary, a nurse and a midwife before describing her as a hand to hold for thousands of people in her life. Reverend Ruth met her husband Chris, a vicar, while working as a student nurse at St. Thomas Hospital. They married in 1982. Chris and Reverend Ruth refused to say goodbye at the end of the 20-minute interview as they admitted who knows what comes next. Taking to Twitter after the show, which can be listened to in full on Chris Evans' podcast, many listeners shared their thoughts on Ruth's powerful interview. One wrote, "Live life with grace, gratitude, generosity." Reverend Ruth on the Chris Evans Breakfast Show. Ruth has openly spoken about her cancer diagnosis before. During a Pause for Thought show in 2018, she said, "Last year when I started with the cancer, uncertainty was the thing I found the hardest, not knowing what the diagnosis was, etc., but suddenly now I am quite happy with uncertainty. I can sit more easily with it than I did last year." How Reverend Ruth Scott went from a nursing career to the altar and the airwaves of Radio 2. Reverend Ruth Scott is an Anglican priest, writer and broadcaster. Originally from Essex, her working life began as a student nurse in St. Thomas Hospital, London, where she met her husband Chris. She went on to train as a midwife, and later became a sister counselor. She married Chris, a vicar, in 1982. After leaving nursing in 1985, she began freelancing as a journalist, writing for national nursing journals, and local broadcasting. During this time she suffered 2 miscarriages and began to think about ordination. Her daughter Freya was born in 1988, a year before she started training as a priest. She became one of the first women to be ordained in the Church of England in 1994. From there, she became involved with interfaith dialogue and broadcasting for the BBC. To supplement her income, she performed as a clown magician at children's parties and learning fire eating to boost her routine. Her son, Jan, was born in 1996 after 3 further miscarriages. She regularly presented Pause for Thought and Good Morning Sunday on Radio 2, Prayer for the Day and The Moral Maze on Radio 4, as well as programs on the World Service.